DoorDash is on a rampage again lowering base pay, and while this isn't new, that isn't the worst of it. It's the fact that they fearmongered us about a doomsday scenario and then turned around and used the very thing that they warned us about against us. This video is going to be a journey, so if you need to, pause the video, get yourself a drink, make an appointment with a therapist, or get your emotional support animal. This video might have you seeing red. We are about to expose DoorDash's hypocrisy and manipulation. If you're watching this video, you know what base pay is. It's the only for sure thing in gig work. This is an example of a no-tip order in my market. If you were misguided enough to take that order, a few things might happen. Your car might break down. You might get a flat tire. You might get a traffic ticket. Or you might get a cash tip. But all of these are hypotheticals. The only thing that you're going to get for sure is $2.75 in base pay, and that's before your expenses. It's long been my speculation that we'll see base pay as low as $1, and a few people told me that I was crazy for thinking that. Don't get me wrong, this is one of those times that I don't want to be right, but it sure seems like we're inching closer and closer to that being a reality. Recently, I started hearing from drivers all around the country saying that their base pay went down again. So I put out a community post to find out where it was happening. And with that community post, I asked what your base pay was and what it is now. Turns out there was a common theme, and I was floored, but we're going to come back to that shortly. It's worth mentioning, when DoorDash decides to lower base pay, again, they do it slowly, market by market. They almost never do a wide sweep. So if your base pay hasn't changed recently, don't assume that you're off the hook. If your base pay was lowered, leave a comment with the market that you're in, what your base pay used to be, and what it is now. Now, I want to pull a Bob Ross and paint a pretty little picture about why lowering base pay this time has so much more of an impact than it did before. I probably don't need to tell you that the economy is in shambles right now, but we're going to look at some examples anyway. This is my rent increase for this year, and since I'm willing to bet that I'm not the only one who got one of these, we're going to talk about it. This year alone, my rent went up almost $200. Last year, it was $150, and before that, it was $100. Are you seeing a pattern there? It goes up a huge percentage every year. I mean, my rent has gone up $450 a month over the past 5 years. Not only did my rent go up, but my pet rent went up also. I want you to ask yourself, have wages gone up $450 a month over the past 5 years? How many of you are making $5,400 more a year at your job than you were 5 years ago? But it's not just rent increases that are causing people to struggle. On average, food is costing 8.5% more this year than last year. And last year, it was up from the year before that. And according to Forbes, it is going to get worse before it gets better. But let's turn it back to base pay for a moment. What did they do this time that was particularly egregious? Typically, when DoorDash lowers base pay, they do it quarter by quarter, but not this time. This time, they knocked it down by 50 cents per order in every affected market that I heard about. I did some MacGyver shit and researched the markets that were affected, and many of them cover a huge area. Well, technically my market is about 22 miles from end to end. Generally, the furthest that I see orders for is about 12 miles, and even those are pretty rare. For those of you who have been driving for DoorDash for less than 2 years, this was sent out in the summer of 2021. This was their excuse for knocking base pay down then. They lowered it by a quarter that time. However, they also promised to raise base pay for longer mileage trips. If you want to pause the video and read that to verify what I'm saying, be my guest, but I'll happily save you the time. While they did lower the base pay for short trips, they never did raise it for longer mileage trips. It was nothing more than a bait and switch. I've had countless people tell me that they see 15 and 20 mile orders in their market on a daily basis because they're so spread out. I have seen far too many screenshots that are going 20 miles or more for $2.50. But don't forget, the total might be higher. If you drive in a rural county, you are going to get orders all over that county. Now, let's assume that those markets that were getting $2.50 orders going 20 miles are now paying $2 an order. That's 10 cents a mile. That definitely isn't going to pay the bills. Not to mention, that 10 cents a mile doesn't factor in your gas. On top of that, DoorDash suggests insultingly low tips. Plus, they themselves are paying these drivers 50 cents less per order. Let's say you drive 5 days a week and average about 10 orders every time you drive. That's $5 a day. $25 a week or $100 a month that you are no longer earning for doing the same amount of work. Meanwhile, people are being charged literally hundreds of dollars more a month in rent. Not to mention, apparently chickens are fucking on strike now, so eggs and everything else at the grocery store is through the roof. So, What are we to do? It's not realistic for us to take an extra 10 orders a day to make up for the loss. Customers sure as hell aren't tipping more this year than last year. Hell, they're feeling the squeeze too. I wish that I could tell drivers what they should do, but it seems like the only option is to keep racking up miles on your car and pray that you don't need to buy a new one. As luck would have it, 2023 is the worst time in nearly 50 years to buy a new car. Due to inflation, if you bought a new car in the last couple of years, it's likely worth more now than when you bought it. Since when did cars stop depreciating the moment you drove them off the lot? Now, if you bought a car in the last few years, that might sound good to you, but I'd like to remind you, cars do not age like wine. They age like fucking Steven Tyler. Due to the nature of our work, we will be looking at new cars sooner rather than later. Now, that's a lot of doom and gloom for the American people as a whole, but there might be a little bit of a silver lining for drivers. Both Uber and DoorDash lobbied extensively to kill a bill in Colorado, and they succeeded. Matter of fact, let me just send you the email that DoorDash sent out to drivers. Hi there, the Colorado Senate is considering a bill that would impose another tax on top of last year's first-in-the-nation delivery tax. With consumers already facing skyrocketing inflation, the bill would raise the cost of deliveries, making it more expensive to access everyday items and food. This added fee would also lead to fewer orders for restaurants, hurting Colorado businesses, and lead to fewer earning opportunities for Dashers and other app-based delivery workers. Take action now to protect Colorado consumers, small businesses, and Dashers by telling lawmakers to oppose Senate Bill 98. I think we can all agree that raising prices would affect the number of orders that we get. So, good thing that DoorDash was looking out for us there. Except for the fact that almost no part of that email was factual. I'm going to explain what this bill actually would have done, but first, note the wording, and lead to fewer earning opportunities for Dashers. I want you to keep that in mind for a moment, because the hypocrisy is coming. Matter of fact, I'll just leave it up on the screen. Colorado Senate Bill 98 was a bill about transparency. All it was doing was showing customers the breakdown of the fees that they were paying and where their money was going. On top of that, it also would have given drivers tip transparency. As if that wasn't good enough, it also would have helped drivers fight unjust deactivations. Or, in plain English, no more hidden tips or wrongful terminations. But somehow that's bad for drivers? Okay, now remember the wording. This email didn't explain what the bill actually was, or the fact that it was a fantastic thing for both drivers and the customers. But instead, they tried to fearmonger drivers and get us to call lawmakers and tell them to oppose this legislation. Seriously, what kind of Stockholm Syndrome shit is that? To summarize, DoorDash was trying to fearmonger drivers into thinking that they were going to earn less money with a bill that was nothing more than about transparency. Meanwhile, they themselves were turning around lowering our pay. This bill would not have negatively impacted driver earnings, but instead would have given us the complete picture. But, you know what does affect driver earnings? DoorDash lowering our pay again. I mean, I know DoorDash has no ethics whatsoever, but they were literally fear-mongering drivers about our pay. Meanwhile, they were turning around and lowering it. Let that sink in for a moment. I could almost have something that slightly resembled sympathy for DoorDash screwing drivers again, if the savings was being passed on to the customers. But is that the case? Of course not. In fact, this is an order that I placed less than a week ago. Take a look at that service fee. That was for 2 sub sandwiches after a $20 discount. Keep in mind, DoorDash is charging up to a 30% commission from restaurants on top of what the customer is already spending. With all that said, it's broken record time. This is a company that will stomp all over us given the opportunity. Do not lower your standards to the point where you're not profitable just to keep the tires turning. We tend to get comfortable doing what we're used to doing. We're crabs in water, and DoorDash is slowly raising the temperature 1 degree at a time, hoping that we don't notice. Drivers might think it's 25 cents here or 50 cents there, but by God, it adds up. We're not talking about their money. We're talking about our money. Keep your standards high. Rather than just doing DoorDash, turn on Grubhub and Uber Eats as well. They might have an order for you. Consider signing up for Instacart, Shipt, and Spark. The summer slowdown is coming, and you're only going to make as much money as you give yourself the opportunity to. DoorDash is far from the only game in most markets. In my opinion, it is never acceptable to lower somebody's pay for the same amount of work. I did a video a while back where I crunched some numbers and show you why a $5 base pay would not be unreasonable. If you want to check out that video, you can find it here. If you haven't done so yet, please do consider pressing the like and subscribe button. My name is Zach. Take care. Man, these guys are some evil fuckers.